What I always wanted to be was to be a writer. Not a playwright, not a poet, not a novelist, but a writer. To write a 6-line poem is as joyful to me as it is to write an 80-page script or a 300 or 400-page novel. So it's about the process. I started writing in the 60s. At some point years ago, I said that what I was trying to do was give voice to African-American males. Because then, that was it seems to me, one of the voices that was least heard in the world.
Next piece is from a play called Riffs. And this passage just deals with the phrase, the Detroit way.
The phrase, the Detroit way, came from a jazz musician, Beans Bowles, who I worked with when I was creating the play Coda for the Attic Theater. And Beans talked about the way jazz musicians in Detroit nurtured young jazz musicians. They nurtured them both in terms of music and in terms of the kind of life skills they needed in order to make it in the world.
I met this kid in the joint. He didn't know nothing, Spoon, nothing.
Did he even know that?
What, that he didn't know nothing? No.
Not even a clue.
Had never been taught nothing. In for armed robbery. I'm surprised he even knew which end of the gun to point. I don't mean ignorant, but unschooled.
I started listening to jazz when I was about 13. And so that was a thing that fueled the rhythms in my writing. Again, because I always wanted to write rhythmically. I mean, it goes back to when I was a kid, and my family would be together at Christmas. And I would just listen to them tell stories to each other. I could hear music and the kind of interchanges between them. It was like somebody would solo for a while, and the others would kind of feed into that, you know, encouraging them. And then at some point, I said, well, maybe I can put this narrative together so that people will feel the way I felt in those moments.
Nobody ever took time to teach him.
He didn't even know to brush his damn teeth every day. I knew if I didn't show him something, the simplest thing, then when he got out, he'd be back inside a month.
Inside or dead, so you showed him.
Just how to get the sound out of the horn.
And once you showed him,
and he knew that he didn't know,
but showed him gentle enough so he wasn't ashamed of not knowing.
And didn't have to be afraid of wanting to know.
The Detroit way, yeah. Like we used to do it. He could learn. If he wanted to, you would teach him.
The Detroit way.
Some people think that poetry should be written only about beautiful things. But no, it's written about life. This is on page 91. It's called City Nights. My windows and doors are barred against the intrusion of thieves. There is nothing you can tell me about the city I do not know. On the front porch, it is cool and quiet after the high-pitched panic passes. The windows across the street gleam in the dark. I started writing as a child. My first poem was published when I was 12 years old, and my first book was published when I was 17, just a few days after I graduated from high school. I have spent a lot of my life publishing the work of other poets. Altogether, it's over 90 books of poetry by individuals that I've published. I think one of the most important books we have ever published was an anthology called Adam of Ife, Black Women in Praise of Black Men. And it's a book that needed to be done.
She has pursued a life of prolific creativity, supported other writers and poets, reached across generations to spark in young people a love of words and writing, and maintained a deep and abiding commitment to metropolitan Detroit. It's my deep pleasure and honor to ask all of you to raise your glasses and toast our 2012 eminent artist, Naomi Long Madgett.
Being a poet and being a teacher has helped me to be a better editor. Everything that I have done has worked together. By publishing so many good poets, I see myself as the first rung of a ladder, and I'm happy to see those poets climb up to better things. The front porch is cool and quiet. The neighbors are dark and warm. The grandchildren are upstairs dreaming, and we are happy for their presence.
I really like real pictures, truth, more than anything. I don't like gimmicks too much. I like straight photography. And so I guess, you know, the old street photographers are the ones that really get me going. And I guess I emulate that to a point. I was 35 when I had my first camera. Henry. I was a salesman and I hated my job. I hated everything about it. I made really good money, but that was all I was getting from it. And I knew there had to be a better way, and one day I just walked away. I started shooting buildings out in Northville, and once I started teaching, I never knew how to get into the Packard plant. I had some students that had been in here, so they brought me in and started a whole new thing. So for 10 years, hit the buildings every weekend, and eventually, I just got tired of having the same pictures as everybody else. And I started shooting people on the street because they were different every time I saw them. Or if I looked away, I'd look back and they would be different. Every face has an interesting story with it. Little Brianna, 7 years old, she's beautiful, lives in Delray in the shadows of the Detroit sewage plant. There's a guy named Kenny who's in a wheelchair, and he lives in a 3-story abandoned building. And there's a different wheelchair on each floor. Okay, you can look at me though. Look right in here, okay? Morris, right? Yeah, right in there. Oh, you got a neat face. Have I taken your picture before? There's a bee. There's a bee in you. So that's why I do it, and I guess if it works because I'm giving them a minute, and they're giving me their life, really, in a minute.
All across the map, music tells a story. As an Armenian, I want to be able to educate to the outside the history of the Armenian culture. In part, I can do that through music. There's history with this instrument, and there's history with this music. You know, the Armenian musicians that came from overseas to bring this stuff to this country, the music to this country, you know, brought with them village songs, folk songs, daily life occurrences were all into folk songs, very simplistic song. Predominantly, I'm performing the folk music that, you know, was brought here. In Armenian music, you know, a typical band was a clarinet, a percussionist, a guitar player, and a Middle Eastern lute called the oud. And those were all taken. The kanun was something that I had heard on records and really loved the sound of it. Back in 1915, there was a Young Turk movement, which was sort of the fall of the Ottoman Empire. They decided, like the Germans did to the Jews, we don't want We don't need the Armenians here anymore. And so systematically they went through and put Armenians on death marches, and subsequently 1.5 million of them were massacred. The ones that escaped, obviously it's why we're here. And I think that's a lot of why we have the music and the culture here. So for me, I'm preserving history. I'm helping preserve history. And I think that's important.
I want to empower people, and not just African American people, but empower people to know that they have a voice. Growing up, I'm of a generation that we didn't get much African American history in school. I was raised with two parents that were part of the migration in the early 1900s from the South to the North, and who came to Detroit. They were a part of a generation that did not want to look back. So there was no history discussed in my home. And all the, I'll say the ugly side of history was never discussed. In the mid-90s, I was downsized from my job, and I went back to school and went to Wayne State. And I discovered art history. It was just such an eye-opener for me. And I realized the power of art. The African-American artist was instrumental in changing the manner in which lynching was portrayed in the press. The crisis was widely read by blacks and whites. For black artists, the crisis provided a space for thought-provoking graphic images dealing with lynching. I was so taken with the notion of activist artists. This was the first time that African Americans represented their culture, and then they had the nerve to represent their people as human beings. So therefore, when these artists represented, when they came up with these works of art, they were putting not only their careers, because they had careers, but their lives on the line. So I want the world to know that African American artists were a part of the art community, active participants for many, many years.
Everyone, I think, has something that they think of as an optimism filter, whether it's the song on the radio or the coffee they're drinking. What's the thing that keeps you on your path? For the Billboard series, I have an interest in the billboard that's right outside of my studio windows. I'm working to put up a sign that says optimism filter. A lot of my work, what I think about is conversation and the interactions that people have through artwork. A lot of that interaction is reflected in my work through text or through my reaction to a space. So thinking of all the commuters that would pass through this space, and how can I offer an idea that isn't forceful but just a passing thought, and how can that affect a commute? I lived in Michigan when I was younger, but I moved throughout the Midwest. I'm from Chicago originally. I teach at 4 universities in the area. With the drawings, I often draw what's happening around me. I mark and notations around the borders. The reason I'm making the drawing is so that I have my pen ready to record. It's some kind of stenographer tendency of mine where I want to be able to capture important experiences. So I pause from drawing the circle to write it down. So I guess I'm trying to create a tangible idea that people can look at and contemplate to connect the composition of the artwork with the people, so the people complete the work. I think by surrounding people with art, you can start to see that conversations are an artistic process.
I remember walking into a harmony house, and I went up to the guy, and I said, I was like, you know, I'm looking for something that was like, there was like this guy on the radio, and he was going like, huh, you know, like, ha, ha, you know, like just yelling stuff out, and there was horns, and I remember being completely lost. And finally, someone told me it was James Brown, you know, because I was able to repeat some of the lyrics. So I bought a bunch of James Brown stuff, and that's kind of where I started to understand the genre that I was enjoying. I'm a musician, a teacher, and a producer. More specifically, you know, drums and beatboxing. Drums. There was no formula for beatboxing. I started out just making noises. You know, I would sit there and just like make noises with my mouth. But having like a drum background, I knew rhythm, and I was able to kind of put that together with the noises I was making. Beatboxing is unique because the way your voice sounds depends on really partly the makeup of your body. I enjoy being able to kind of step into different roles, you know, do my best to master a specific skill.
The way I understand the world, it feels like everything already is fiction in some way, so I feel like just the whole medium makes so much sense. I'm really interested in setting, and most of my settings are really ambiguous and not really a place in this world, because I like to build them from the ground up. I was trying out a bunch of different kinds of writing in college. And so I went to Japan, I did art criticism, and I went to Ghana, I did creative nonfiction, and I just sort of feel like the more places you see, the more little bits you get that help you build your own world, your own worlds for fiction. My father made his living gutting houses. Copper, aluminum, brass, nickel, tin, lead and bronze. A concrete floor will be veined with steel, and steel will fetch a good price. It is a tedious assignment, though, like mushroom hunting, plucking a gold-plated faucet from the wall. If you mistakenly throw an alloy on the pile, he'll turn you away forever. I graduated from college in 2009, which was sort of the beginning of the recession, and I moved to Detroit. And I started seeing all these signs popping up. We buy gold, you know, you see those everywhere. And I just got a really weird image of like this future where you bring things that, you know, you used to have from a time when you had something to merchants, and you have to sell it, and it developed into this whole world that's set in some sort of future where everything is, there are no resources left, and you have to sort of scavenge to make a living. The merchant keeps us waiting almost an hour. We are insignificant. His peddlers bring him tons of metals, I bring grams. I lay trifles, a sandwich bag of gold fillings, on his desk. He sees me only as a favor. He appreciated my father's work. He's never asked where my wares come from. He pays cash.
I see myself as a storyteller, not as an artist. And I use these materials you see around here to tell a story. I'm trying to produce art that's based on traditional African concepts, and I do not try to go in the contrived way. I don't try and paint beautiful 6 feet tall black people with spears and half-naked ladies, I internalized how my ancestors would produce that subject. And it may not even look like the subject, but because I say it is, it becomes it. The Beard Museum is a result of my experience with the Museum of African American History. We have probably about 50,000 species of beads, specimens of beads. Each bead is handmade. They're representative of pretty much every culture on the continent of Africa who dealt with beads. They have different meanings in different areas. I was born in Kenton, Mississippi in 1948. I left the South when I was about 10 years old. I got my start when I was on disability from General Motors. I was in a major automobile accident. Stayed 3 years in the hospital with back injuries. Part of the therapy was to paint. And I discovered that as long as I was painting, I could tolerate the pain. And that just catapulted me into a whole new arena. Out there on the field, there is all kinds of small pockets of information that's given in stories. One of the largest one out there, there's a 150-foot by 20 feet high wall that has 24 African languages, scripted languages, the same way English would be scripted on it, written prior to colonization, enslavement. And there are symbols out there that suggest a family. There's symbols out there that talks about the two extremes, children and ancestors. You have to keep the people reminded of what's most important for them as a people. And that's one of the underlying themes here, is that the African understood that process, and it always reminded people of the most important things on the planet.
It's more interesting to me to be lost in sounds. I like to feel confused and disoriented and unsure of what's going on when I listen to music. That's like the kind of stuff that's exciting to me. I hope with my recordings to kind of bring that same feeling to other people. My solo project, Cotton Museum, is all electronics. I'm trying to collect things that make odd sounds and layer them. I really look at it like kind of like classical movements in a classical performance, you know, an orchestra. There's different boxes that I've got that aren't mass produced. They're made by people that I know or friends of mine. In a lot of ways, I don't even look at the instruments that I bring with me as separate instruments. I kind of look at this card table that I have as one instrument in itself. I just got started hanging with friends. We just would record things, find anything that made a sound, and we got 4-track recorders and just tried to layer it and, you know, just kill some time, see what happens. The drawings that I do are really a big part of why I'm making music too. I mean, I feel like they both spur each other on. You know, I can be really focused on making music for a while, get burnt out on that, and then I have this whole other idea of, wow, hey, all these thoughts came into my mind when I was recording, all these weird you know, mutants and creatures and things like that that I'm now going to draw that represent what I recorded. I want it to suggest the frame of mind that somebody might want to come at the record with. You know, I want it to be a starting point for your mind to drift off to. People all throughout the history of music are doing just super out there stuff. Those are the things that I draw from.
One of the things that I have always done in life is I look for myself in the books that I read, and I look to find my own experience reflected there. everything that I've done professionally and academically, college in Boston and grad school outside Boston, 20 years of teaching American literature has actually been wonderful training to be a creative writer. The thing that I really want to do in my writing is to find a voice, to find a way of telling my story that raises the story above the level of mere plot. You know, I want to make it something that has aesthetic significance apart from the experience itself. I took a break from the paint fumes and went out to my garden at the end of that first day of work. I discovered that the neighborhood groundhog had ravaged all of my peas. My fencing wasn't enough, wasn't buried nearly deeply enough, and he burrowed underneath and dug his way in and chomped everything, leaving disaster everywhere. There's not a whole lot of literature about the stepmother experience. And that seems to me to be a really strange gap in the literature, because there are so many women who are in that experience. And so when I first became a stepmother, you know, I started reading The Toddler Years, What to Expect, and I started reading parenting manuals. I couldn't find anything that explained or prepared me for what it's like to be a stepmother. And so in a way, I'm writing the book that I wanted to read but couldn't ever find. And I'm afraid that my love for Elizabeth doesn't even matter in the world, not one whit. Maybe it's all just new paint on the walls in the end, just a cute sweater that no longer fits.
I mean, a lot of people consider many Detroit neighborhoods to be dying neighborhoods or losing neighborhoods, and we wanted to really sort of shift that idea, even if it's just conceptually, but also very realistically shift the idea into how do you sort of shift the energy in the neighborhood.
So we are sitting here in the powerhouse, in the attic, the somewhat renovated attic space of the powerhouse. And the powerhouse gets its name for a couple different reasons, but one is that it's off the grid, so you can hear the wind turbine going, and the solar panels are up on the roof now. And so all the electrical power needs from the house are met through the house itself. Yeah, I think a lot of the work we do is about starting conversations, starting dialogue. So with the neighborhood machine, every time we roll it out of the garage, it's sort of this point of conversation.
I guess step one is to sort of introduce ourselves to our neighbors as artists, and then to sort of do a lot of our art process in the neighborhood as opposed to in the studio, so that people get to see sort of the process happening. For example, yesterday we were using the neighborhood machine to collect mattresses, which are sort of prevalent in the alleys and whatnot. And so we stacked them up real high on a trailer, and then people started texting us or calling us and asking us what we were doing, not because they were concerned, but because they were interested in our next project. The neighborhood machine is for moving, demolishing, rebuilding the structures in the neighborhood. And we're trying to make it into something more interesting, more artful, and more useful. Some of these mattresses will actually, and the chairs will go into the skate park that we're building over here. There's 4 trailers. There's a utility trailer, which is the mattresses are on, a solar trailer that powers tools and whatnot through solar panels and batteries, a jar trailer, which has a lot of jars that have different screws and nuts and bolts that came out of a house, actually. And then there's a garden trailer that has a wood chipper and miscellaneous garden tools. Everything you need to rechange, rethink, resculpt a neighborhood.
One, two, three, four. I had on here back in '89. February 28th.
A lot of my writing gets influenced by where I grew up, where I was born and raised. A blue-collar steel mill town.
And now it seems like they're shutting this town down, so tell me, what am I supposed to do? And what am I supposed to do?
One of my favorite songs I ever wrote, a song called What Am I Supposed to Do? I wrote it about a guy when I was a fireman, and what happened is this U.S. Steel had shut down for 6 months, and he was having like a panic attack because they told him, hit the bricks, man, like you're done, like we're laying you off. And he had worked at this, I remember he was like, yeah, man, I've been working here 20 years and they're letting me go, and he was like crying uncontrollably. So like, you know, I just went home and started writing this song called What Am I Supposed to Do? And it took me a while to like write it because there were so many things going on. I feel like in America, you know, the housing market, and so many people are losing their jobs, and it actually took me losing my job to finish the song because I guess I had to go through that.
And I wonder about my fate. The government check's gonna stop coming soon. No more help from the state.
It's so much better when you write from the heart and you're talking about things that you're going through or someone else is going through, and it comes from the heart. You can tell. That's just it. Nothing better than that.
Love inspires me, and the bravery that exists to love properly, unselfishly. Major inspiration for me. Concurrent theme in all of my books. But then again, I'm a marriage and family therapist. I do marriage therapy. So I'm always at the interface of that question. And that has only empowered my writing. In fact, I would be nowhere as a writer if I wasn't a psychotherapist. My most recent book is a book of poems that are really elegies, prayers, and lamentations and rah-rahs about Detroit, and the book is called Beautiful Rust. The city is a woman, said the man on Forest Avenue. He was holding his brown bag of fortune, and his eyes were salt. Do you know she loves the body of a man, even though he's beat her? We take our chances when we love someone until the end of it. The heart of a city, this one, is full of coughing and dead radiators, and men whose time is a lottery. The feminine principle, of course I'm a shrink, feminine principle that preserves beauty, that preserves a place where gathering circles can come together, was violated terribly in Detroit. And that was my experience as a young man, is that it was a very machismo place. I've got another little book coming out called Scrap Metal Mantra Poems, and there are more poems about Detroit with a much more descriptive slant on what's happening now. Then I have a whole different book, because by no means would I want to consider myself a Detroit city-only writer. I would never want to limit my artistic me, whatever the me is that writes. So I have a whole nother book that's just love poems. Just as my wife, who's standing at the vanity mirror, distributing the California fuchsia lipstick across her soft lips, is also just herself a theoretical construct. We are about to celebrate our wedding anniversary. Watch her as she widens her eyes to find the woman she believes herself to be tonight.
If you understand how America has this whole love affair with the surface of the automobile, in the 50s it was so exciting. They were pink and they were salmon and they were baby blue, and now they're gray and silver and black. And how that corresponds with culture and how we see each other. You would understand my work. So I use the same process as far as painting, you know, the same basic paints, and I'm perverting that into an idiosyncratic language, which is all the pattern. A car is obviously mass-produced, so that means in mass, each car is exactly the same. So using that idea, I want to create an object that appears mass-produced, has a seamless surface, but becomes idiosyncratic through the paint pattern, the patterning that I put down on it. I think color almost changes the way you understand the form dimensionally. So it appears to be soft and maybe spongy if I put a soft color on it, when in fact it's steel, and very few other products will do that. All the forms in the sculpture are models. They're toy models. All of the ones I pick are military or something developed for the military that has a huge power in the world. And so I'm trying to talk about when someone builds a model that scale has been shifted, it changes our relationship to power. At a certain point, I realized that a lot of the methodology I was using to construct this sculpture could be building very small, thin sculptures out of paper. It's a real combination of technology and hand done. And I've developed a big body of work that's all laser cut paper. Often, I've had people say that my work is a sort of surface burlesque. It reveals, it conceals, it reveals, it conceals. I think that's true.
This gentleman here is a bebop Spartan. He's a graduate of Professor Rodney Whitaker's program up at Michigan State. He's a brilliant trumpet player. Please, Chris Johnson.
Most of the performance that I'm doing nowadays is with my own group. We do a lot of original music. We have songs that go from 1 through 25 in various odd meters. I was born in Detroit. You know, my dad was a bassist and my uncle was a keyboard player. And so I think that that early influence was important just because music was a regular part of our household. I toured for about 3 years with the Count Basie Orchestra, and that was just like this whirlwind of opportunities. It was really incredible. Got to work with Tony Bennett, got to work with pianist Hank Jones, got to work with singer-songwriter Jamie Cullum, got to kind of travel around the world, went to Japan, went to Europe, played all over the US. We're just finishing up, really close to finishing up our album. There were a couple of dedications. One in particular I wrote for my son. You could probably hear my son Bennett running around upstairs. That's what he does. He actually spends a lot of time down here with me on my lap while I'm writing music.
Here, you know, I'll take him up. Yeah, good job.
I spent a lot of time up in the middle of the night waiting for him to fall asleep, and he'd be laying on my chest. I'm laying on the couch, and I composed one of the songs while he's laying there. It's called Bee's Lullaby.
When people come to a text, when people come to a painting, when people come to music, they put their own experiences in there. But I'm hoping my work leaves some gaps and spaces and places where they are called to have their mind and their psyche fill in spaces. The official report on human activity, or Long for an Elephant, an essay. 1. Ipso and the elephant. When Ipso gave birth to what most agreed was an elephant, there were those who tried to act as though it was normal. Well, yes, he was a man, they said, and no one had known he was pregnant, but it was, after all, a small elephant. The favorite piece of mine, it's about a factory worker that wants to be a writer. He gives birth to a small elephant. Prior to the birth, he had been eating strangely and spending an inordinate amount of time alone. But no one had taken those things as signs that anything unusual was about to occur, because he had said that he was a writer, or that he wanted to be a writer. He had trouble deciding which of those things to tell people, because writing happens so much in the mind that he thought it would be difficult to know when or if he had crossed the threshold. So really the story is actually just an excuse to talk about what it means to write, what it means to be creative. It's really just about the creative process to a very large extent. Inspiration is a very strange thing because I am still being inspired by things that happened in my childhood. I'm a baby boomer, and Detroit is a factory town, or it was when I was growing up in it. And so the influence and the milieu of the factory is something that's spread throughout a lot of the work. And all I can really do is illustrate it. I don't know if I can come to any analysis. It's the skeleton upon which folks have to put their own meat. It's the blueprint upon which folks have to put their own building. They have to build their own building in their own heads with it. A lot of it is kind of surreal and strange, and so you have to figure out what you're going to make of it.
When you give functionality to artwork, it has a very important role other than just being a piece of artwork that hangs up on the wall. This right here is the tile piece that's on the side over here. This is the strength of the community, and the suitcase represents the deportations of Mexicans back down to Mexico during the 30s or so. I listen to people's stories and I translate those stories into pieces of artwork. My thing is to talk about the revitalization of the city of Detroit and how to sort of give a visual narrative on the positive things about the city of Detroit and the positive things about communities, on how we can make a difference. When I was working for a billboard company, got hired 2 years before I got out of college. I think I was only 23. That sort of was my training because I painted 40 to 50 hours a week for 12 years. I was drawing every day, painting every day, and mixing colors every day. I did my first fresco painting for the Richard Duvall Center in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It was 7 feet by 5 feet, it weighed about 400 pounds. And then the next piece I did was the Detroit Athletic Club. Actually, I was the first African American to ever be commissioned to do artwork at the Detroit Athletic Club. With my experience of doing large scale work, I started going after many different levels of media, for everything from terrazzo to tile to fresco paintings to bronze to extruded aluminum, all these different various mediums and all. There's artists who paint pieces to hang up on walls, but I wanted to be the artist who actually design a wall that happens to be art that holds up a building.
Choreography is a lot of hard work, and I think a good choreographer, I think, has to see movement in their mind, and you can have ideas, but you really need to spend a lot of time in the studio.
You guys, is that you're hitting some sort of shape and it's just looking like you're running with your arms sticking out in space. It needs to look like you are swiping through the air as you're going through.
I ended up having sort of this varied background. I said from theater and gymnastics, and then I went to New York and I danced with a whole bunch of different companies. As a dancer, I have training in ballet, modern, and jazz dance. I danced for many years, so I have performing experience. All that experience I bring to the studio every day I walk in there. And so when I'm trying to get something specific out of a dancer, I either try to give them some sort of emotional imagery, or I'm giving them something very physical. Okay, you need to move more with your pelvis rather than your feet or something. Yeah.
So what are you thinking when you're going over their backs? Don't fall off?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it kind of looks that way. I think you need to think about getting to the other side so that as you're sitting, you're kind of ready to go over there. It's sort of a pathway there.
I usually choreograph 1 or 2 new works a year. I do have a lot of different approaches to my choreography, and it's made my choreography a little bit more eclectic. Each year since I started the company, the talent level just keeps going up and up and up and up and up. And to me, one of the benefits of having a dance company is that you're working with these dancers, you're training them in the style and the way you want to move, and they're all getting to know each other. And so that's one of the reasons I keep a dance company too, is so that I always have access to these really amazing dancers to be able to do my work.
My writing style is very visual, highly imagistic. It's based on what I come in contact with in my life and who I come in contact with. I was born in Detroit, but my family comes from Trinidad and Tobago. So both of those influences are evident in my writing. I've been in Detroit all my life. Worked in the Cadillac plant for a good portion of time, and then I went to the General Motors Tech Center. So I was really sort of steeped in the industrial world. In the late 80s, it was really clear the plant was going down. And it was actually a grieving process for me to write about the factory and its people. This is from the last car. On any other day, the cobalt blue Fleetwood body would rest unattended on a trestle at the edge of the second floor, its sides smudged with assembly fingerprints, its windshield taped with assembly instructions called broadcast sheets. Already fitted with an instrument panel, seats, a headliner, internal lighting, and wiring harnesses. It would wait for descent to the final assembly line to unite with the engine and chassis, the hood and fenders, headlights. Then, ooh la la, it would become a Cadillac Fleetwood Brougham. I'm real far away from being a kind of a social realist in my writing. I'm always looking for the magic of what's in that story.
Theater Bazaar is a combination of a grand party inside an art installation piece, somewhat based around a turn-of-the-century carnival at its core, but it's also not meant to be. It's not meant to take place in this reality. The party part of it, don't care about as much, but I like it. I like it both ways. I like it when it's teeming with life, and then I like it on its own when it's just this, it's abandoned and desolate. When I was younger, my parents would take me to a lot of wax museums, roadside attractions and tourist traps, as well as natural history museums, historical museums, all throughout the South and New England. That was a huge influence on my imagination, or kind of built a lot of who I am and what I wanted to do. Texture is extremely important. Even as a base, when I gesso a canvas, I mean, that's as important as the final brush strokes, and also take on a life of its own outside of my control. Just there's a beauty to the surface of it. In the beginning, I started painting some of the carnival banners. They were paintings of friends it was their costumes, and because so many people there's been so many volunteers, I started working on the Congress of Freaks to say, these are all the people that I want to paint the banners of, because these are these characters that I've been dealing with. With my personal work that's away from the grounds, I'm condensing a lot of the imagery, the things that I'm using here, can pull that into a canvas or an object or whatever I happen to be working on, and be able to take it to the level that I feel I need to.
Well, Macho Man and the Women Who Love Them is all about an independent woman who falls in love with a traditional Latino man. And they're really trying to meet in the middle, but they can't seem to do so because they're both sort of alpha personalities. I play about 10 different characters in the show.
Latino men, they're great lovers, but marriage, forget about it. I take a lesson from the other women in the family. With the exception of you, they're all either pregnant or crazy, or sometimes both.
The combination of training that I've had allows me to mix in, comedy with classical theater. Just studying with like Uta Hagen and Marcel Marceau, the mime just allows me to be completely free on stage. So physically, I'm just freed up. And we took the show all over
16 cities, 6 countries in Europe, and we put it up at the Kodak Theater. We sold out the Kodak Theater. And
Ay, mamita, I must dance with you. You are such a beautiful and professional woman. All the other women here are sluts. I know they are sluts because I've been with them all many, many times.
the second show I'm writing right now is called Macho Men and the Women Who Marry Them. And it's all about that same couple trying to make a marriage work and the commitment that it takes to really make a marriage work.
A lazy, good-for-nothing trampa. She doesn't cook for my son, you know? And today, she made him wash his own clothes.
I think growing up in a mixed-race family always had me look at life in a universal way, and so that reflects through my art.
And the way she dresses, you should have seen her when she came to my house today, wearing red spandex, looking like a puta bitch. See? And she's negra.
Detroit has been one of the primary feeders of talent to the national jazz scene throughout the history of the music. You cannot pick up an LP recorded in New York in those years without running into 1, 2, 3, sometimes 4 musicians that were originally from Detroit. I am working on what is my first book, which is a nonfiction book about jazz. So this is from a 2006 profile of the pianist Hank Jones. It was written when he was just on the cusp of his 88th birthday and still playing beautifully. Jones's art is comprehensive. He is a sensitive accompanist, a brilliant solo pianist, and an emotional improviser who develops ideas like a storyteller. His swing is impeccable, his taste unerring, his touch angelic, and there is just enough grease in his ideas to balance his tuxedoed elegance with down-home soul. Well, the book is called Made in Detroit, Jazz from the Motor City, and it's a collection of essays and profiles about all the great jazz musicians that came out of this city from mid-century up to the present day. I grew up as a jazz musician. I grew up as an alto saxophone player and was addicted to this music from the time I was 11 years old. And so when I went to school at the University of Illinois, I was a history major, but I was spending all my time hanging out at the music school and in jazz clubs and playing in my own groups and working around town as a musician and all of that. One of the most gratifying things about writing about jazz in Detroit is that you are writing for an extraordinarily informed audience, right? These are people that went to high school with Barry Harris and Tommy Flanagan. These are people that had grown up with this music in the house, and it means something to them. And so we're not just talking about history. There's a legacy here, obviously, and the history is critical, but it's going on today. You know, there are great musicians making this music right around the corner. Pay attention.
My studio, I really want it to be a place where I spend time exploring the making process. There's many other mediums out there, but for some reason clay, I'm just really drawn to. And the history of clay is something that interests me as well. Greeks, for instance, were using the vessel not only as a functional object, but they were using it to tell stories. So when I'm making these pieces, I kind of want to tap into that a little bit, and I want these pieces to look like they have a little bit of history, like they're not maybe so from maybe this time period or this place. I feel like I'm kind of taking that idea and trying to bring a narrative into my work. I come from a grocery background. My father's a grocer, my grandparents were grocers, my uncles are grocers, like everybody in like my family like owned and like worked in grocery stores, and you know, by default, you know, I got hired in to work at the stores too, and we in the store make a lot of like gift baskets and things like that you know are sold. And most of my work now, I don't think I really bring that maybe domesticity or warmness into the piece. You know, I kind of make them very crudely, quickly. The surfaces are rough. They're mainly like, you know, dark glazes. They're not polished pieces. And I find like that there's a little bit of a poetry there. This basket here references Membre pottery, who were Native Americans, and what they would do, you know, part of their tradition, part of their culture is they would take the vessels that they would kind of like have, you know, and use in everyday life, and then when someone dies, they would set the vessel over the deceased, and then punch a hole. Not everybody may know about, you know, those certain aspects, but they help give the work a little more depth and maybe start to help create a narrative within the vessel. And I want it to be, you know, an interesting object at the end of the day.
From Tuesday to Saturday, you can find poetry in Detroit. And a lot of people don't know that at all. Like, I meet a lot of people who have never been to poetry slams. And they're like, I didn't even know this existed. I try to do at least a monthly poetry slam where I bring an artist in and other artists battle it out for money. And it's all about the featured artists. I write about a variety of things, you know. I'll hear about a hate crime in the LGBTQ community and it'll be closer to home, and I'll write about it. And I'll hear about something that has to do with domestic violence and that'll touch me, and I'll write about it. She's 12. She thinks light-skinned girls are gulfs and black girls are just their oil spills. Her only talent is pretending to be a preteen Sky. She's responsible for raising all of her mother's sons, and I know that this makes her believe that us women were born to be winter doormats, a place where men wipe their shoes and leave snow and leave cold and leave little girls with nothing more than speed bumps to look forward to. Amber Rose. I grew up in Detroit. I went to a lot of local high schools, and we didn't have a lot of poetry classes. So I didn't know there was a world full of poets out there. So that's what I'm trying to get people to do in Detroit. I'm trying to get them to fall in love with the arts, to fall in love with the art of poetry slam. To Tyler Perry, I respect your grind. I love your ability to shine like a blood diamond in the middle of a Jacobs the jeweler store with nothing but your people around, spending millions of dollars for you to make them look better. Thank you for your service to us black people. See, we do more than go to church on Sundays, get abused by our men, and barbecue while celebrating the recovery of our once cracked out aunties like yourself. We make movies like Usain Bolt. We make history like Oprah. We make billions like Obama. We make change like Malcolm X. We make America uncomfortable by letting the light-skinned brothers with the good hair and the good sense speak. But where have you been all of your life?
Lafayette Park and the Mies van der Rohe townhouses were developed on land that was once home to a crowded, vibrant community originally called Black Bottom due to the dark, fertile soil. The name came to signify the thousands of African Americans who, along with scores of immigrants, poured into the neighborhood after World War I, seeking work in Detroit's automotive industry. Often, 2 or more families were packed into a single house on the verdant blocks of Black Bottom. The book, Thanks for the View, Mr. Mies, is a compilation of many anecdotes, photographs, pictures, stories from all manner of residents of this area. And I have one of the longer contributions, an essay, that was used as an opening chapter of the book. Mostly I write about music, though. I love music. I grew up very close to my father's record stores. My father had a record shop called Joe's Record Shop. His name was Joe Von Battle. And he opened up a record shop on Hastings Street. And Hastings Street was the center of commercial life in Black Bottom, and it was near Paradise Valley, which was the center of entertainment life in the African American community in Detroit. He was the producer, the sole producer of the Reverend C.L. Franklin and all of his 50-plus sermons. He also began to record Reverend Franklin's daughter, Aretha, and he is the first person to ever record Aretha Franklin's voice. I think that because I was in the record shops as a young girl, it gave me a certain attachment and love of popular music. And over the years, I've written a lot about Detroit music and the importance of Detroit music.
Photography can be really investigative, and my projects are investigative in their nature. I set out parameters for an experience, but I don't predetermine what the outcome of that experience is going to be. My background is in documentary photography, but my work includes photography, video, performance, building a car. With this more recent piece that I've worked on for the past 10 years with this car, the Easterman Trabant that turns into an El Camino, my original motivation really comes out of trying to solve this really kind of classic documentary problem of being an outsider. I wanted to do a project where I could gain legitimacy, where I could be an outsider and then become an insider. So there were 3 ways I thought of that I could become a custom car builder. There's the people that own the cars, and that's easy, you can just buy a car, you know, and then there are the people that build cars, and then there were also the people representing the cars, the bikini models, because usually when custom cars are shown in magazines or on magazine covers, they'll have a bikini model accompanying the car. And so I had, as a woman doing this project, I had the ability to do all 3 of those kinds of roles. When I started the photographs early on, they were pretty much about me and the guys that I was working with in the shop and the kind of tools that I was learning how to use. One of the things that's happened with the car over time is that car project also maps this kind of journey of a young woman going into like a certain part of her adulthood. I mean, it's like 10 years of my life. So, you know, there's these images of myself in the bikini, and then I did a video of myself during the pregnancy, a bikini video with the car. And then now that I've finished building the car and I'm married and I'm a mother, it became interesting to me to make some more of those images that would kind of track that change. So I went to Texas to shoot these photographs along the Rio Grande. I shot on various locations with my partner Brian and my baby Raphael. Things that happen on the edge of a group, like on the edge of like Americanness or on the edge of lowriderness or on the edge of art, like when you're hitting the edge and you're almost falling off of it, it's where innovation happens. It's like where the really weird, funky things happen, you know? So I think that it's an optimistic piece in that way.
There's a bit of insanity, I guess, that comes with our music.
We just put as much as we can into everything, into the music and how everything looks, and we want to have everything as on point as possible. It's a constant evolution.
We can kind of take our music wherever we'd like.
Do you believe in what you can't see at a long distance? Something's wrong, different, like early stages of autism. Small children with birth defects, the earth's rejects. We're in the dunce, but we autistic. The narcissist, the architects, and tall Christians all distant. Cause I ain't had no bar mitzvah. I'm building man. And what you lack is what I call wisdom. I'm feeling it. To get it back, that's when I call mister.
I get influenced by everything. I mean, as far as writing, whether it's, you know, hip hop or old rock albums or old blues albums and all that.
He's got all these records, and then I'll stop by his house, he'll put one on, and it'll be like from 1978 from this record company that, you know, no one's ever heard of, by a group no one's ever heard of. But there's something from that record, or there's something in the voice from the main singer that inspires me to say, that person had something to say. I have something to say. Let's recreate what that person has to say through me, you know? And that's something that I think Brian and I take pride in, is kind of reimagining things from old, or kind of revamping ideas that were just kind of overlooked or just unappreciated at the time.
Cause this is sunset. Pool parties, open wine bottles, stale peppermints, horse flies, talking heads, talk about that deficit, apple pie, moonshine, afternoon high, June, July end, playing chess with friends.
Sealed out a blaze in a Woodbridge haze, heat index at 108 and I won't shave. Late night Coney runs, barbecue, better mains, Valentine.
You really have a lot of people in the city that are like reimagining what the possibilities are for not only hip-hop music in Detroit, but just music, period.
Driver seat, backyard, rooftop, at all breathe in your sunset. City, 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 city.
Cause this is sunset.
Runny nose, stuffy nose, transformers blow, lockout.
Zombie preparedness plan. My daughter has discussed at length the safest place to hole up in the event of an attack. She takes her living dead seriously considering the necessary accoutrement for survival. I used to plan how we'd survive a tornado. I used to check out the closest exit in case of a fire. I practiced defensive driving, and when I taught poetry in schools near crack houses, I carried pepper spray, because sometimes there are no words. Part of the role of metaphor is to see connectedness, things that seem to be different, the ways in which they are not different. And you come away from a good metaphor seeing both those things in a new way and with a connection that you didn't know existed or maybe had never thought of. Science angles its way into my poetry because I live with people who are connected with science and I've always been interested in it. This is an example, maybe more clearly, of a poem that comes from a little snippet of science reading that I was doing. There was a part of the book that was talking about the sex lives of snails that were surprising, really surprising. So I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about how different we think we are from the animal world, and certainly from something as humble and lowly as a snail. So this is what I came up with, and it's titled Dance. Consider the land snail, lust-driven, rearing up onto the tip of its tail, or rather its foot, ballerina on point. Slippery critters, which naturalists tell us, then sway in a tricky balance of shell and flesh, not at all unlike how we too might come face to face. The sharp barb of losing oneself in the other, balanced against the by and by inevitable absence, so that we hope to save some part of whatever tango, twist, pirouette we can manage, clutching the photo, the token, a stay against the willies, the toxins, the loneliness, the too soon quiet, pressing its full weight upon us.
Originally, like learning knitting, one of the things that my grandmother did for me was teach me all sorts of ranges of crazy crafts. She was a first grade school teacher. So I learned to embroider, learned to sew, learned to paint. She bought me my first painting kit. And one summer she taught my brother and I how to knit. And I didn't keep up with it, but then my wife's a knitter, and in about 2000, I said, I want to learn to knit again. And she showed me how, and the costumes just sort of came after that. I am a little influenced by comic books in the sense that I read them when I was a kid and learned to draw by copying from comic books. But I'm interested in pop culture in particular, and so how mediated images of men and women might reflect back onto different individuals and how they might position themselves in relationship to that. The costume work started with the body of work before that, which was a set of embroidered comic book covers and some quilts made out of comic book pages that had embroidery on them. And they started because I was thinking about ideas about protection and danger, mostly. I was living in Arizona at the time. It was 2003, so it was 2 years after 9/11, so everybody was talking about how the terrorists were going to come across the border from Mexico and get us. At the same time, I have 2 children, and they were young enough at that point that they were just sort of pushing at the edges of the neighborhood. You know, it's like, we're gonna go to the park. And I remember one day my daughter rode off to the park on her bike. And I was like, what the heck's going on? I'm worrying about this. And so I started this train of thought with the work about how do you take care of those people? And I thought, well, superheroes do that. So I'll become a superhero. How do you become a superhero? You've got to have a costume. And most recently, I've started the series of action figures, or inaction figures as I title them, which are about 12 inches tall, and they're carved out of wood. They have knit costumes or flocked costumes, so it's a little about how does the kid take care of the doll, and what do they see as the personality of the doll. We think about knitting as a more feminine thing, but we might think about superheroes as more masculine, so using things like that to make contradictions in the work that make people stop and have to think about what this thing is all about.
The way I think about my music is more project related than kind of a single description. And for me, having a moniker of My Brightest Diamond helped me put a framework around the pop music that I wanted to write. In the show, you know, I use the masks, I'm doing dancing, I'm changing costumes and stuff like that. I think My Brightest Diamond has been characterized kind of in a very broad sense by trying to bring my interest and my love of classical instruments and also my love of playing guitar and, you know, making pop songs. I sort of have 2 different trajectories of my career. One of them is more as a singer in other people's projects, and then My Brightest Diamond is kind of my pop writing, but then I'm also writing instrumental music as a composer or writing music for plays.
Of exhausting inexhaustibles.
And that's kind of another little facet of my art tree. But in the world of engaging with other people's work, I've stepped in to other artists like Sufjan Stevens, the Decemberists. I've worked with Matthew Barney and Matthew Ritchie on projects that they were working on, and then it kind of all feeds back into My Brightest Diamond.
When you're privileged, you don't even know you're privileged. When you're not, you know. When you're happy, you don't even know you're happy.
Records are like a portal through which you can almost go back in time or go into that moment that they were captured, you know, whether it was 50 years ago or at this point even 100 years ago. I've always attached a lot of mystique to music, and I've just always more been curious than anything else. You know, I'll hear something and go, well, where did that come from? Why does it sound like that? Who were these people? What was the story behind their recording this record?
Big man, 8 ball inside pocket.
A lot of the music I'm writing about is like from the 50s and the 60s. Most of my writing could be a chapter in a book. It could be on the liner notes on the back of a record, an album, or a CD. These are some liner notes that I had the honor of writing for an unreleased song that Melvin Davis recorded at Fortune Records. Dedicated followers of the Motor City sound have long bowed at the aural altar of Fortune Records, the elusive imprint responsible for introducing the atmospheric sounds of Nolan Strong, Andre Williams, Nathaniel Mayer, and so many, many more to the world. Corralled in a crude cinder block building on 3rd Avenue in the rough and tumble cast corridor,
Fortune's high-Q record mart lured music lovers and musicians of all stripes and colors, many of whom found themselves participating in impromptu recording sessions in the notorious dirt-floored back room that served as a studio. Nobody had ever really written about this guy. I mean, he was in our midst here, and people didn't know about him. You know, I mean, in England he was really popular. He was going over there. Well, that's how a lot of these artists are. They're popular in other parts of the world, you know. That's my goal, you know, to try to have the next generation of like musical archaeologists or discoverers, people that get turned on to this stuff, get excited about it the same way I did.
I started painting when I was 10 years old. The first painting I ever did was a photograph of John Kennedy sitting in his limousine waving. When I'm painting people, the poses are usually defiant, usually confrontational. And even if it's not angrily confrontational, it's still that attitude is definitely there. And it's a legacy of growing up the way I've grown up and my own political views. And those views are being shaped by family and living in this community all these years. Some of my favorite painters, improvisation is a really big thing, it's really important. And I always saw that and music is almost equivalent. What I paint is usually people that I know. In particular, I'm wanting to use other artists cast as jazz artists because I see some correlation between painting and jazz. It's kind of a way to portray painters in that kind of heroic light that I usually see reserved for musicians. In this one here, there's Sophia Gardner and Harold Allen, who are two of my favorite abstract painters, actually. And I'm having them pose as Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. I got the instruments according to the artist that I wanted to paint. So, like, an extreme example would be that this is a very small pocket trumpet in there. And pocket trumpet is what Don Cherry played. With me personally, I think it was the music of bebop that really opened the way for me to appreciate abstract painting.
Out of all of the rock genres, metal comes closest to classical in terms of how technical it is and how far it's going to take you in your technique. So I actually think that even though they sound like worlds apart, that they're actually a lot closer. So every time I write a song, I'm trying to do something I've never done before, and hopefully that nobody's done. I'm going off of certain, modern classical compositional methods. On the surface, I'm using these dissonant tonal relationships, but on the middle ground or background, I'm using familiar relationships. I started as a teenager with my own band where I wrote everything, and just started as a punk ska band, and then it slowly started getting more, a little more aggressive, and it got more progressive. When I was 18, I started rediscovering classical and getting back into piano and just became obsessed with it and decided I wanted to put the band thing aside and go back to school. And as soon as I got there and realized that you could major in composition, I knew it. Well, that's for me. I've always been that guy. At the back of my mind, I always thought, though, if I go to school and if I can become a classical composer, come back and use that with the band. You know, I could really, you know, make something groundbreaking that nobody's done in a band before.
I am a fiction writer and I romanticize the landscape. I make it a little bit more mythical than it is. So I'm not really one of those writers that does kind of draw from his own autobiographical experience. The river was not far from the place we called town. Our town, it was a dirty river town with a dirty river running through it. Our town, us brothers discovered, it was not the kind of a town where cars not from our town like to stop. I wrote a book of stories called We Make Mud, and there's a whole series of these stories about these two brothers. And basically the story is they grew up in this town, like it's not named as this town, but it's a town with a dirty river running through it. So a recurring scene in that book is that these boys basically go out one night to the backyard of their house where they've erected this sort of totem pole with all these fish heads that they've hammered and nailed onto it. What we did with the heads of these dirty river fish was this. We like to take these fish's dirty river heads and we like to give each of these fish heads each a name. Not one was called Jimmy or John. Jimmy and John, that was mine and my brother's name. We called each other brother. I'm really inspired by place and just by language. I do love words, and you know, I'm the type of guy who, when I write the word, or even if I hear the word river, for instance, the first thing that is in my head is not the river, but is the way the word looks on the page. I like the word brother, and that's out of that word and the sound of that word and the conjuring up of that word for me. These brothers sort of rose up out of the language itself. That I don't have a brother, and maybe it's out of those absence of things that we are drawn to the page and to create the characters that we create.
I grew up hearing so many bad things about Detroit. That's all you heard growing up was just how horrible it was. And so I think I found myself rebelling against that and wanting to find the beauty in the places everybody told me that there wasn't any. For years, I was trying to collect things for artwork. I'd have ideas from things I'd collect, but I think I was also fueled by wasted materials. Not only because I wanted to preserve parts of the past, but also because I was broke. And when you don't have any money, it's free material. The process is slow. I think that in some cases, I have buildings that I was planning on working in 10 years ago, and maybe I'm just starting now. Like the one I'm working on right now in the train station, where I've decided to build kind of a life-sized egg shape out of broken pieces of marble. It'll take me months to do that. I work site-specifically wherever I go. Detroit is a very unique place, and I still have lots of ideas here, and I want to keep working here. And it's a good home base. But when I go to other cities or other countries, I get different ideas based on the history of that place, the people I meet, things I find out. There's a thread through my work for the way I work, but it changes. When I was in Australia, I worked in nature. I worked in the bush. That's what I had around me. So I ended up working with sticks and dead cow bones. I didn't grow up thinking like an artist. That was really my own like moment, cathartic moment, was the point when I got into the car accident. Something had happened that I thought I could have died from, you know? So it was a very transitional moment that happened like catastrophically, not like a smooth transition. More like I'm gonna make a choice here or something bad's gonna happen. So I took a bus, the Grand River bus to the Warren bus to CCS and applied. And that's really when I started to look at the city in an artistic way. I'm often attracted to things that are mysterious to me, and I'm interested in making places and environments where people can discover something that they might not know who the hell did it or where it came from or what it is. We don't live in the age of discovery anymore. And I think that maybe I long for that kind of experience, creating that kind of experience.
Oftentimes when we speak of the African American experience, we speak of it in terms of being something monolithic. And by no means is the African American experience monolithic. In 1967, at the age of 13, I shared in the Passover dinner with my best friend at the time, Stuart Hahn. Stu's father, his eyes closed and arms outstretched, spoke these words over the bread: freedom from bondage and freedom from oppression, freedom from hatred and freedom from fear. The type of writing that I do primarily is wanting to share with people what it means to be human, what it means to be African American, what it means to be an African American interacting in the world around them. I honestly couldn't understand why I had been called an Uncle Tom by some black classmates for having attended this dinner. The prayer seemed quite similar to any prayer delivered on any given Sunday. My name is Stephen Mac Jones. I'm a playwright, and I have 2 new plays, Cadillac Kiss and Mainsbridge Station, that are looking for homes. Both plays are comedies that explore specific black experiences, and mostly they are meditations on how that Passover, Ojibwe, and black prayer for freedom is often crowded with personal struggles and seemingly insurmountable challenges.
I grew up in north, very close to Russia, North China, called the Jixi, Jixi, a little coal mine town. It's very natural to me. If I see some instrument, I can grab it, start playing some songs. I know. I just need to look at it, play a couple of times, couple of minutes, figure out where is where, and then can play. I play piano. I minored piano in the music school, and guzheng and pipa. Those I could have a performance. But the erhu, that's what I know best. Well, I have 3 bands so far. One is the classical side. You got to approach it really seriously. I still keep that because I love classical. I'll never change anything about that. And second, it's the rock and roll part. Do whatever you want, just make noise, whatever you feel like. And then the other, I think, is right in the middle to combine them. You have that delicate side, and then you have some new ideas. I like to be the bridge and to do something for the community, to get more people to exposed to Chinese music.
不闻几处响，只闻女叹息。问女与何？